David to our weekly webinar. David is an experienced psychologist and couple counselor who has dedicated his career to helping individuals and couples build a stronger, healthier relationships. He is the founder of Fox Psychology. David blends evidence-based approaches with a compassionate, down-to-earth style that helps clients feel safe, heard, and understood. With his training in Dr. John Gottman research on what makes love last, David specializes in transforming challenging dynamics, repairing trust after betrayals, and also regaining emotional and sexual connection. He has a unique style, which is combination of professional expertise and engaging communication style, which makes him a sought-after media commentator and workshop facilitator on topics like infidelity, communication breakdowns, and keys to lasting love. David's mission is simple yet profound to help people create relationships where they feel cherished, supported, and deeply connected. And today's webinar is about infidelity, and I'm going to ask some questions from David, and you can make your questions ready, and feel free to ask when I finished with the questions. So David, I think everyone has this question, which is why people like cheat? Like what's happened? What's the reason behind cheating? So can you mention like a couple of reasons for that?
Sure. I mean, firstly, I guess just to give a little bit of the background on, I guess, my experience with it, working with couples since 2011, it was actually a bit surprising to me the number of couples that came in where there was some form of infidelity. People have different names for things, and I think people interpret them in different ways as well. You know, emotional infidelity, physical infidelity, cheating, flirting. There's a lot with that, but just the number of couples that came in that were struggling with these things. And I guess what struck me soon after that and working with some of these couples is how many couples do try work through it. Statistically, 1 in 3 couples can go through, and come out the other side. And the thing is, it can actually be what I call a catalyst to create a much stronger and better relationship than you had before. But it's not for the faint-hearted. It requires more commitment than other relationships and more rebuilding of trust and transparency of communication, to go through that. And it's a difficult process. But 1 in 3, obviously means 2 in 3, 2/3 of couples don't sort of survive.
Oh, I
But I
see.
guess through my experience, I've seen some similarities to the ones who do survive.
Oh, I see. So, 1 in 3 couples they seek couple therapy and also they survive. Yeah, they can build the trust.
Well, actually, it's not 1 in 3 that seek couples therapy. It's 1 in 3 that can survive an affair or infidelity. And I think those 1 in 3, yes, probably went to therapy, because very rarely can a couple just process it by themselves. Most people have no idea how to do that.
Oh, very interesting to know that.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
the reasons, um, many, many reasons. But the way I think about it is, when that's happened and couples are coming to me, is that there is a vulnerability somewhere. There's a vulnerability in the relationship somehow, or there is a vulnerability in the individual who's cheated or broken the trust or betrayed. And it's not just infidelity. Obviously, there's other forms of trust breaking, betrayal around money, around addiction, around many other things, I suppose. But, and the process of how you deal with that will be a bit different. But that vulnerability is understanding that something opened the door a little bit, cracked the door open for something to happen, in that relationship. From the couple's perspective, working through that, comes later, in a later stage. There's things you need to do at the beginning before you look at, well, okay, why did it happen if there was something going on in the relationship? But that's the second one. If it's, and it could be both. There could be something happening in the individual who strays, and something that's happening in your relationship. Or it can be where, there's relationships where people are very blindsided because everything was going really well. And there was even intimacy and they were still having sex, and then they found out something else was happening. That's more rare, I think, in my experience, where it really only sits within the individual. There's something in that individual, could be something like a very high need for admiration, or there's like a hole they're trying to fill that nothing will really fill in the end. So
Yeah.
those are the two sort of high level reasons, but obviously it drills down from there.
And I've heard that some personality disorders are more prone to do cheating. Is that right?
I think some personality disorders are more prone to highly sexual activity.
Oh, really?
You
So,
you could say that they're very sexualized people, sexualized behaviors in some of the personality disorders.
so can you bring some example of that? Like which personality disorders are more prone?
It's a hard one to say. I mean, the two personality disorders that most people will ever come across in a relationship are either narcissistic personality or borderline
Yeah.
personality disorders. And both of those have a strong element of ego issues. And usually they come with a lot of energy and passion as well. And that translates into sexualized behavior as well. And in fact, I think bipolar maybe as well. There's a bit of that element of highly sexualized behavior. I mean, that could be related to dopamine levels as well, and other hormonal issues that comes with mood swings and that kind of thing. I haven't studied infidelity from a biological reason perspective, I suppose. It's usually more psychological and emotional.
Oh, I see that. So, and then just some of the tips that you use like in couple therapy to help couples to just regain that emotional intimacy and closeness. What are those ones?
Well, I'll come back to that in a second because that's kind of the later stages. But if we look at reasons why, and you look at the relationship, right? And I've written about this. Part of it is there are actually quite a few relationships I've come across, and I was talking to someone about this today actually, where they think that they can ignore the sexual aspect of the relationship and that it will be okay. That they can go for weeks or months or years in some cases without any intimacy, and then they're shocked when somebody cheats.
Yeah.
And so this is what I tell people in my rooms, right? And I've said to people, I think I should paint the walls of this room gray, because that's what it's like in that room. It's not black and white. It's not that. And out there in the world of black and white is, oh, that person cheated, they're the bad one. They're the bad one. But when you go deeper into people's relationships, that's very rarely what's actually going on. There could have been a very long history of ignoring, and what John Gottman calls turning away instead of towards each other. If you look at the John Gottman relationship house, he
Yeah,
talks about something that's very important called turning away versus turning towards, or bids for connection.
exactly.
If there's a bid for connection verbally to try and engage and talk to your partner, and it doesn't happen because they're distracted or not focusing, then it's called a failed bid to connect. And if it's same with the physical, trying to wanting a hug or hold hands or try to initiate sex doesn't happen. It's called a failed bid to connect. But everybody fails sometimes. But if this is becoming a pattern of behavior, we're turning away too much, we're not recognizing our partner is trying to connect physically or mentally or emotionally. He says this is the very first step towards infidelity.
Yeah, interesting to know. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, and then so what partners can do to kind of vaccinate then the relationship that doesn't happen? Like, is it any way?
Get a vaccination, get a shot, get a John Gottman vaccination. That's what I would say. Look, you need to be the very first thing. There's other element about why people end up cheating. One of those things is that they haven't resolved past hurt. Right? They've not resolved, so that creates. It's like people sweeping things under the carpet, and that goes back to when I said that there are couples who've been through infidelity who don't do it properly, don't process it, don't go through the steps they need to go through. There's three main phases couples need to go through, which we can talk about later. And I've had that before where there was an affair 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now another one has happened from either side. And it's usually because the first one was not resolved in the right way. So it set things up in their relationship that created big problems like power imbalance, or somebody always being on the back foot and feeling like they now don't have a voice because they were the bad one. They did the wrong thing. So then they're always got the other partner can always say, but you did this to me. So, and that they pull that card out and that creates other problems. If a couple wants to work through this kind of thing, you cannot have resentment follow you into your future. It won't work.
Yeah, I've heard that, the best things that can help couples to build a long-lasting relationship is learn forgiveness and how to forgive. Yeah, no one is perfect. And some people hold resentment longer and they can't process or resolve, but they don't say much things because they avoid conflicts. And
Yes.
have you seen more like avoidant people doing cheating because they are usually afraid of kind of communication and they are just I think
Yes.
they are more prone to cheating than the
Well, a
people
very quite
expressing.
recent example of that actually. A couple that came in last year, towards the end of last year, and they'd been, before they even got married, they'd been dating for a while, and there'd been some cheating on his side, and she was extremely forgiving. So forgiving is not really even the thing. It's important over the long term, but they never really dealt with it properly. They didn't process it properly. And then they got married and now they have had kids. And now she's found out there was, at the end of last year or beginning of this year, an 8-month affair that was happening. And when we were exploring why it was happening, it was one of the core things was because these people both actually, it's a tough one because they both love each other.
Yeah.
But she was sitting in the session going, but you say you love me, then how can you do this to me? What does love actually mean to you? That's a whole other thing. But his reason, which she was aware of, is that he would not communicate. If something was bothering him or upsetting him, he might try a little bit, but for the most part, he would go into these mental funks. He would get depressed and he did not know how to deal with his emotions. And there were other things from his history that we explored together. In his case, things like growing up in a home where his mother was constantly cheating on the father.
Yeah.
So there's historical things, and I do see this where there's been cheating in the home that they grew up with, that can be a pattern that shows up. Either that they end up with a partner who cheats or they're the one themselves.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think is it genetic related or is more learning like
No,
in the
it's
past?
learning. It's definitely learning. I think a lot of people like to try and put on genetics because they go, oh, it runs in my family. And I'll say all the time, well, is it really? Is there a gene for it? Or is it because the learning and the observation and the modeling subconsciously was learned, was taken on, even if they consciously said, I don't ever want to be in that type of a relationship, but then they end up in that type of relationship.
Yeah.
So
You're
there's that in terms of that. But yes, as you're saying, like, is it because people don't talk about the things that are upsetting them or hurting them, which creates resentment and then opens that door again for somebody else at work? A lot of the times these things show up in the workplace. Why? Because people start to share. They spend a lot of time with the people at work, and then they go to the work drinks and the Christmas party and the whatever. And now somebody's giving them attention or someone's listening to them, and they start sharing details of what's going on in their life. And one of the things about infidelity, there's another researcher on infidelity, Shirley Glass, and John Gottman talks about her quite a bit. And she talked about something called walls and windows. And she says that what happens when someone starts to share something about their marriage or their relationship with other people, if the people they're talking to are not what John would call a friend of the relationship, a friend of the marriage, which means that that person you're talking to will always be balanced and always wants the best for both people. But often, if you're talking to someone who doesn't know your partner or doesn't know your spouse, then they're just going to listen and they might just agree with you. And then what happens is you're opening a window for somebody from the outside to see into your relationship. And at the same time, you build a wall between you and your partner because your partner now doesn't know that that is happening. Or
yeah,
you're sharing things about the relationship through the window to someone else, and your partner doesn't know that that's how you feel.
yeah, that
Although a
makes
lot of the times people do tell how they're feeling, and the partner, they don't resolve it.
yeah. So I've noticed like it's probably it's not openly communicated, or sometimes when it's openly communicated, they kind of they build, as you said, the wall, and they feel they are attacked back, and like they doesn't take it seriously, their partner, so then they shut down. So there are many things going on, but yeah. Definitely, it's just, it's not one night thing happening. It's a kind of is happening gradually, and but especially in a relationship, the gap happens, and like it becomes bigger and bigger until,
Mm.
cheating is a sign of, something in a relationship is not working. So it's one sign of that. So
Yeah.
as the other things.
Well,
Yeah.
the other interesting part, if you're looking at the statistics, is that, you know, men were quite far ahead of women in the numbers, was something like 40% or 50%. But then in the last maybe, I don't know, 20 years or something, or 30 years, women have been catching up to, not in a good way, to men in the amount of infidelity that happens. And I do see it just in my practice anecdotally that there are as many of the women that are cheating as the men.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I'd say overall, yes, more men, but there's also plenty of women who end up cheating as well. And I think men and women cheat for different reasons.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, so is it like women more for kind of is it emotional, and men more like physical and sexual? Yeah, is that like is it a bit
Well,
different? Kind of.
that's a belief out there, which I think is not true either, because
That's good to know.
yes, I think generally it's for I've had just as many men who've come in and working through infidelity or cheating who, when we get down to the core of it, it was because there was a lack of what John Gottman calls admiration.
Hmm.
And admiration represents not like you need to admire me, but it's like to feel appreciated, to feel valued, and to feel heard. And I think a lot of men, when you get to the bottom of some of the reasons it's happened, it's also for them, it's also a form of connection. Of course, it can be just physical. If there's absolutely no physical, if there's no intimacy, no sex happening in a relationship for months or years, then it can be from a physical perspective. But you can't separate that really, because if there's no sex in your romantic relationship, then you're actually not connecting emotionally either.
Yeah,
You
that's right.
know, but yes, more for women, it's that mental emotional um, connection, or that need for connection. Maybe that, the husband has been listening much to them. There's no real connection. They're not paying attention. All those bids for connection are failing. Or again, there's past hurts or resentments on both sides sometimes, where it can lead to that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
just so kind of similar. It's more like deep down, like emotional connection needs, yeah.
I think a lot of the time,
Mm,
it is that. And then it's a case of, I guess, what stages the couple needs to go through to recover. And it can take a minimum of 12 months
mm,
just to go through the therapy process,
yeah.
right? And then it's like, so some of the things is that something that we want to go through, is a little bit of what that process would look like.
If you can tell, yeah, just in a bit summary, like what is that process like the couple go through, like some of the steps, that would be great.
Yeah. So there's different researchers on this topic and different theorists around it, but the Gottman approach obviously is often very scientifically based, and when they talk about three phases that the couple needs to go through. First phase is atonement, and atonement, the way I describe it is that there's a few steps you need to go through in that atonement. I don't like the word atonement actually, because it sounds like, you need to atone for your sins for the rest of your life type of thing, and it shouldn't be that. I think it's more about, there needs to be a genuine sense of remorse
Yeah.
from the person who's done the cheating, rather than defensive reasons and explanations. And you cannot, when you're working with a couple with this kind of thing, you cannot go into what was going wrong in the marriage straight away, or in the relationship. Why? Because there's so much emotion at the beginning that needs to be processed from the person who's been betrayed, who's been hurt. And so I think of it as a few R's. Like the first R is that genuine sense of remorse that must be demonstrated, the need for reflection, self-reflection on the person who has cheated, right? And this is where it often can fall down. Because if the partner is not willing to try to look at themselves and say, why did I do this? It's the key for the other partner to say, how do I know this won't happen again?
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
that requires a lot of work. Then there is requests from the person who's been betrayed that will help them start to rebuild the trust. And those requests can be small, kind of small, like let's keep location services on, no passwords on the phone. Sometimes that's a really big request for some people. I had a policeman who was married to a psychologist, and he had cheated two times, maybe three. It
Okay.
happens a lot in the police, I think. That's what I've heard. And I've seen that in some of the couples. Um, and he refused to open the phone at all. And he would give a lot of excuses. Oh, we have a lot of banter between me and my colleagues, and I don't want you to get upset and read that. But I'm like, if you've been caught cheating and your partner is willing to stick around and try to work on it, and you don't want to open up your email and your phone and whatever, then something else is going on.
Yeah.
And you're not truly showing your level of commitment. And that one did not work. It did
Yeah.
not last.
Yeah.
And he, the person who comes in, and I had this in my early part of my career working with this, where they came in and she was wanting to talk about what had happened. And his approach was, this was maybe 4 months after she found out. He was like, we've talked about this. I said, sorry, why are we still talking about this? And I'm like, he has no idea
Mm,
of the journey you need to go on if you want this to work. So that's a few of the R's, and that atonement part also is characterized by questions, right? The person who's been betrayed has a lot of questions, and the biggest question is, what else don't I know? Because if I didn't know about this, there's a lot of other questions that show up. And it depends on also what's happened. I've had couples where somebody did something one night drunk with someone, and that was the only thing that's ever happened. And I've had ones that have gone on for months or years or 18-month physical, emotional, people that came into their homes that they knew, that they had dinner with, that was happening behind their backs. That type, and it all creates a bit of a trauma, but the research also speaks about some of the reactions from the person who's been hurt to being very similar to PTSD.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's like
because
as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Very similar.
it's a traumatic event,
Exactly. Very traumatic.
and the reaction someone will have will be similar. So there'll be intrusive imagery, like flashbacks to memories that weren't real for them, but they're imagining certain things. And it can be really hard for someone going through that, because these days, especially with most people finding out through phones and online and that kind of thing, they come across messages, photos, videos sometimes, and that creates a whole lot of traumatic images. So it makes that even worse for them to process. And they've got to, the reactions would be the intrusive imagery, hypervigilance. So this is very common. They'll like, where are you? What are you doing? Why are you on your phone? What are you doing in the bathroom for so long? So there's that hypervigilance that comes.
Easily triggered. They can easily be triggered, and it's hard like to, not to control, and also that can cause, more the person who cheated also feel suffocated and feel that, losing his freedom, and no matter how he tries to build a trust, that doesn't work, because it's just like,
Yes.
they just yeah.
So it's very difficult
Yeah,
for
very
different reasons for each person sitting in the chair is extremely painful. The person who is willing to sit in the chair after cheating has to deal with shame and guilt and not being trusted, rightly so, and the fear that they will never be trusted again. And being able to sit with this, the thing that I'd say that they both need more than any other attribute over the period is going to be patience, because the person who's been cheated on needs to have patience for the other person to build the trust with them, and on the other side, they need the patience of their partner to go through triggers, and that it's never a linear improvement. One step forward, two steps forward, someone gets triggered and they go back again. But they make the mistake of thinking that means we have not progressed. And that's not true. It's just a normal part of the process of recovery. So that's the atonement. Do you want to ask something?
This is the first phase, you said, the atonement. So
and you're coming out of the atonement part. This is the other part about it. So when this kind of thing happens, the reason the person's brain starts going into detective mode is because they had a picture of their life and it was a puzzle that was put together, and the puzzle breaks. And now their brain is trying to put the pieces back together. And they go, okay, so when this was happening and you said you were over there, you were actually over there. And it's almost inevitable they will go through that process of putting it back together. But when you're coming out of phase one is when the emotions are not as intense and the person has asked all the questions they need to ask. The thing with questions is some questions should be asked and must be asked, like who was it with, why, did it happen, how many times, those kind of things. But there are other questions that are not going to be helpful. The level of detail that some people want to find out is going to cause more trauma.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're right.
Yeah. So then the next phase, when you're coming out of that, the person feels they've asked all the questions and they've got the answers to the best of the other person's whatever knowledge or ability. And their emotions are now, they're having days where, they didn't think about it maybe for an hour or a day. Then they're starting to move into that second phase, which is called attunement. And attunement is when you actually, I don't go exactly by these structures. It depends on what the couple is comfortable talking about. But attunement is when you actually look at the relationship and what was going on in the relationship, what was happening with their needs, were the needs being met? Did they talk about what was going on in the relationship? What's the history of this relationship? What have been the past resentments that have shown up? What have been the gridlocks that they have never resolved? Like someone who's very social and wants to always be going out and doesn't come back till certain times, or there's that lack of respect of even honoring time frames or communication, or past resentments and hurts cause a lot of problems that have not been dealt with. And we go through a process, I do this with most of the couples, is identifying each person's most important relationship needs, and specifically how you can meet that need in behaviors. And we work through, and try to understand that. And then they've got to move into attachment. Again, I think it's attachment. I always forget the name of the third one. But that's almost like where you recommit, even though you need a very high level of commitment right from the beginning. Otherwise, you wouldn't even bother staying. But when something like this happens, John Gottman's house has 2 pillars of trust and commitment. And if the trust is broken, that commitment wall is going to shake pretty badly. And it's very difficult to deal with anything in the middle of the house until you deal with, with that. But I've often been surprised at the level of willingness of people who have been betrayed, sometimes more than once, to continue to be committed.
Yeah, that would be like great, because when they go through like this process together, that after that, if they can come out of that makes the relationship even stronger, because they have worked like on a project together and like they know each other better, and like it's just if a couple can do that, that would be great. So.
And some couples move relatively quickly back into having a physical relationship, and some don't.
Yeah.
There's this phenomenon, I think it's called something like reclaiming your territory, where sometimes suddenly there's a completely new interest in sex from both sides quite soon after something like that has happened. And then other times, it can take quite a bit longer for that to start to change. But it should change once you do some of the emotional work and you start to understand what's going on and what's happened, and you've begun to rebuild the trust. And, it's unfortunate, but it's not going to ever be something that the person forgets.
Yeah.
But it's the whole idea of it is to take the event from being, and this is any hurt or injury, you've got to take it from being like a full HD movie in colors and sounds, and you've got to process it so it becomes an old faded black and white photograph that you put away. And like an old scar, you can see it there, but it doesn't hurt like it used to. Like that's how you need to get to.
And I think if the couple also accepting this responsibility, that even if they are cheated on or they haven't done any cheating, but they play a role in that kind of like, even it might be like, as you said, like emotional bits, which not, even in setting boundaries, like, they might be weak in setting boundaries, or like they have been cheated before, but didn't like
Oh yeah.
take it that seriously. So there are always things that they can learn about themselves, that how I played a role in that. Even, most people think, oh, the cheater is the, worst person in the room. But as you said, it takes two to make a relationship. So I think the first step probably would be kind of see if they can accept even a little bit like responsibility in that how they can do better, like what is the part that they missed in the relationship. Because it's not enough kind of a relationship failure as a third party that they need to both look after that. It's not just one person responsibility, yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the ones that I see where relatively quickly the other person, when you're like moving towards the stage two, or even sooner, can recognize that they played some part in what happened. There was a couple that came, well, actually, it wasn't a couple, just the wife that came to see me many years ago. And she had recognized that they had set something, well, she had set something up that their kid's bedroom from when they were very young was very close to their bedroom. And she had had her own trauma about closed doors in her past. So they literally, she got the husband to remove the door from the child's bedroom. And because of that, they didn't have sex because she didn't want them to hear,
Yeah.
right? And you can imagine after years and years and years of that, and then her recognition of, yes, there was definitely something that I contributed to that by the way it was set up in the marriage. And that one was a case of, he was pursued by somebody, and they got drunk one night, and and slept together, but she recognized relatively quickly
Yeah.
that there was such a lack of physical intimacy, and there had not been any discussions, and gave them some tools to talk to each other. And she said one day they sat on a Saturday afternoon on the bed and spoke for about 4 hours, 3 hours, like they hadn't really spoken for years.
Yeah.
And then they ended up doing a recommitment ceremony eventually,
Yeah.
you know.
Good. That's great. So, do you have any like last word, David, to say tonight? Because I want to open for other people also can ask questions. So, I want to hear
Sure.
the final words if you want to say like.
Final word. That's a big ask. Um, I don't know what sort of would be a final word about it, other than there is a way forward through what most people would say is something that they would never tolerate, and they would just walk away. But that's easy to say. But when there's kids involved and when there's a lifetime together, and if you can recognize that, one of the things that the way I describe it is when that trust wall is destroyed, the only thing that's left holding your house up is that commitment wall. And it's the level of desire in both people to try. And it's either an affair is either the thing that blows up the whole house and it's finished, or it's the catalyst and to something better. And the couple has to recognize and accept that the relationship they've had up to that point is gone forever, and it needs to be gone. And that gives them the opportunity to build something completely new and better than it was before. Because the thing that nobody ever, like, that people cannot cope with is the idea of, all right, we'll have a bit of counseling, I'll forgive them, and that will carry on in the similar ways, and we don't really understand why it happened, or they don't understand themselves. And that is a big question. How do I know this won't happen again? And ultimately, that requires work of both people, but also the person who's done the betraying needs to do their own work. They've got to do individual therapy.
Yeah,
They
that's
just do, because otherwise they will never figure it out.
yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. So now, I want to know if anyone like in the room has a question. So um,
They can put it in the chat if they want to.
yes. So,
Nisha says something there. A couple of questions. What exactly is considered cheating? Is it only when someone has sex with another person, or can things like flirting or emotional connections also count as cheating? It's a good question. And I think thank you, Nisha. There's definitely a lot of the emotional cheating is considered sometimes as bad or worse to some people. Going back to the couple I was talking about earlier, also actually was a policeman where, the guy who shut down and then someone came along and, he ended up having this 8 month affair. And she actually, the lady he was having the affair with was very unhinged and was blackmailing him for that sort of for many months, saying she was going to tell his work and tell the wife and everything. And it's a very complex situation. But the wife, who I found, she's an amazing, amazing woman. But I was perplexed by her responses when I said, "So you're not that upset about the fact that he had sex with her?" And she said, "No, but if he had any intention of leaving me or having an emotional connection to that woman, I would leave."
yeah.
And so that emotional element is definitely cheating. The thing is, sometimes what people will say, it's not so much the event that causes the damage, it's the fact that they A, didn't know about it, and B, that there were multiple lies that followed and were told to their face, no, that's not what it is, and we're just friends, and what are you talking about? And the gaslighting actually does more damage sometimes. So that's that emotional element. Flirting is an interesting one. Some people are just naturally flirty people, and it's like, okay, where's the line? Where's the boundary? The boundary is anywhere that your partner is uncomfortable, but within reason. You can't have someone say, well, I don't want you to go and talk to any woman socially at work, and I don't want you to be laughing with them. And, it's a tricky one. Ultimately, it's about the level of trust and honesty that's in the marriage or in the relationship. And some people are hyper sensitive to their partner, even maybe because of their own past. Their partner, even just like having a look or glance, someone that comes past there. And that's not good either, because then what that does, it runs into some of the biggest need conflicts that come into your relationship when you get into any relationship, which is what Esther Perel talks about. You have this need for stability and security, and building something comes into conflict with the need for freedom and variety and novelty. So if you're too controlling of your partner and you get upset every time their eyes look around, that's going to cause its own problem.
Yeah.
So sometimes, yes, it can also be just more that someone is hypersensitive to their partner even looking at someone. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I want to add like something. Yeah, as you said, I remember like they are saying that women usually are more sensitive to emotional like infidelity, and men are more sensitive to sexual infidelity about their partners. So, and that
Yeah,
also research shows that. So this is also interesting. So women can easily more easily forgive if they know it's been just, physical intimacy, not the emotional one. And for the men is opposite. Like, so this is interesting also fact. So
yeah, and then you get the other side of the coin, which is people who have open relationships, right? And even having an open relationship doesn't protect you from cheating
yeah.
or protect you from the thing coming undone. I worked with a couple who'd had an open type relationship for 15 years, and they thought they had all the answers to it and was going really well until she fell in love with a woman that she was, having fun with, and he was quite narcissistic, himself, the husband. And so, again, it wasn't the event even that caused the biggest problem. It was the damage that he did after there'd been sort of this event, in the way his anger showed up, and his resentment and his desire almost for revenge showed up, as well. So, but it is an interesting concept, even just to maybe we do another seminar on open relationships.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Actually, I was in an Uber it was last week, and then the Uber driver started opening about that he has an open relationship. I was
Your
so
Uber driver was telling you about his
yeah,
open
and
relationship.
I was
Love
so
it. I love it.
surprised. And so telling me, I said, "Don't judge me," but I have some. My goodness,
Maybe he wanted you to be part of his open relationship.
I don't know. It was a very short drive, and I was happy that I was get
Yeah,
out.
because you're like, stop the car, get me out.
Yeah, but it was interesting that he was explaining, how they swap these partners, and I was,
Yeah.
and I
And you
was
know what's really interesting out there? People think about people who have open relationships as there's something wrong with those people. But the people who get it right have to have, this is the way I see it, higher levels of commitment and trust and communication and transparency than a normal relationship, or normal monogamous relationship, because an open relationship still requires huge amount of trust, a huge amount of being able to talk, not the kind where they say, I don't want to know what you do. That will never work, right? And the level of commitment that we're still together and we're always going to be together, and this is our base, and we always tell each other everything that's going on. And a lot of people will get into that type of thing because they don't want to end up like a statistic. But it's a very, very tricky road. And then obviously you've got, the open relationship, which is usually more on just only physical. And then you've got the polyamory, which is like you can have many relationships and be. John Gottman was asked in the middle of a seminar once, do you have much research on polyamorous relationships? And he said, no, because they don't last long enough for us to study them.
yes.
And then his wife, Julia, was on the stage with him, and he says, I can't imagine why you'd want more than one wife. I have to, I can only deal with one Julie, his wife. She looked at him with such a look, but she knew he was joking. But
Yeah.
so
I've heard like 4%, like in Australia, they have open relationships. So but maybe it's growing, because that was a statistic I had a look 2 years ago. So I don't know how it has changed.
it's
But
definitely changing. Even if you look at the apps that are showing up, for example, I don't know if I should mention the app, but why not? There's an app called Field, which is for people who don't want the traditional,
yeah,
the relationship. There
yeah.
is another question. Do you want me to look at it?
Yes, the second question. So Anusha, during the dating stage, are there any red flags and signs that might suggest someone is more likely to be unfaithful in the future?
Biggest sign is if they were unfaithful in the past.
But they usually don't reveal that, they don't tell that.
That's true. I think some people do, or it sort of comes out at a later stage. Other signs and red flags I would look for is hypersexualized behaviors. If they've had a history of hypersexualized behavior, not always, but it's something to note. And a very, I guess, low self-esteem is potentially part of that as well. And a very strong need for approval.
Mm.
A long, strong need for approval probably is, I'll just sort of keep an eye on that. Someone who's extremely, I don't know, ego-based, if you can put it that way, but that's no guarantee either. Every situation is very unique. But if someone is not willing to do any self-reflection, if someone's not done any work on themselves
Yeah, exactly.
either, or if they're more likely to deflect back to you or never own up to anything and never say sorry, I mean, that's moving more towards the personality disorder stuff. Then I'd say, I don't know if that's a statistic at all, but I think there's higher risk of something like that. But then you also have to take into account that if people have been through a lot of reflection after they have done things that were wrong, and they've committed to being better in the future, then that may be better than someone who doesn't understand themselves.
Yeah.
If they've seen the pain that it has caused them in the past and their partner in the past, and that has changed them, then they might be the kind of person who resolves, I don't want to go through that pain ever again.
Yeah.
And I see that with my couple sometimes.
Yes. And also family history of cheating. I think, for example, if their father cheated on the like mom, I think
You
they,
can go either way. It can either go into hypervigilance
yeah,
about any kind of cheating, or it can go into they end up cheating also.
yeah, that's right. And the other thing, maybe narcissistic personality, because they don't have that much empathy. If you know the signs of those people, then those are, I think, more also prone. Or the people who do risky behavior, as David said, like people who have some bipolar, so they mood changes a lot. So, or borderline, which are quite have like they are, the borderline. One of the way you can find out is, they easily start, becoming close, so close, and they soon want to have like, sexual intimacy, which can show that, they don't have any kind of boundaries. And so that's also can show that person can do the same thing with others as well. So I think
It's a good point.
that's, mm,
Yeah, very good point. Also, that's one I would look out for, is what people's boundaries are like.
yeah,
And if you've said to them that something that their behavior in a group or socially that makes you uncomfortable, and then they make you feel bad for it or make you feel like wrong for it, that's also a flag. Because ultimately people are going to flirt and people are going to be whatever they're going to be out there, but you must have the kind of trust in your partner that you know that they are going to shut it down.
yeah,
That they shut it down, that you can't stop people being people, and you can't keep your partner locked up in the house and never going out. So it really is about, do you understand their character? Do you understand their integrity? Do they have boundaries? Have they had boundaries in the past? That kind of thing. And the other thing is, like, do they have addictive type personality? Because
yeah,
often one addiction leads to another.
yeah. Or the people who are like extremely anxious in a relationship or avoidant, they are all think are prone as well, because they need kind of more validation, or they feel disconnected more easily, especially like the avoidant people, who are the people who are socially isolated. They don't have support network around them to emotionally support them. So because it's emotional support from, like, as Esther Perel said, if you have a tribe around you, like, friends, family, good relationship with several people, you don't expect all of that from your partner. But if someone is isolated, so they expect usually everything, like, that emotional closeness and everything from the partner. So they are more prone when something missing, then they go and cheat. So that's other thing I noticed, like in couples. So healthy relationship with friends, other family members, and also people who, they break up in, like, they have had like several, like, past relationship with others, but they keep them in the loop, and they keep friendship after relationship breakup, and they normalize that. So it should be boundaries, when they come to a relationship. If they don't want to just keep a boundaries with, like, still, keep friendships with the exes and everything, like,
Oh yeah, that
that is
causes
a
a lot
red
of
flag.
trouble.
That's a red flag, I think that, yeah.
That causes a lot of issues. Generally, the only reason to still be connected to an ex is if you have children together. And even then, like, the minimal needed interaction.
Exactly. It should be minimum and very in a formal way, not in a flirting or anything like that.
No. Very good.
Yeah. So,
Thank you, Anusha, for
yeah.
your questions.
Thank you very much, David, so for
You're
coming,
welcome.
for accepting our invitation. It was really good. We learned a lot, and so everyone, thank David, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining tonight. And I hope we can see David soon again with a very good topic.
I've got lots of topics. You can pick many of them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks,
Great night.
Sarah. Thanks
Bye
for
bye.
organizing it.